She did everything right, worked harder than anyone in the room, smiled when she wanted to scream, stood behind a man who took credit for every idea she built from scratch. And tonight, in front of 500 people, crystal chandeliers, and a ballroom full of the city's most powerful, he grabbed a microphone and turned her into a punchline. But she stood up, and the most feared man in the room couldn't take his eyes off her. Welcome back. If you're watching from your city, drop it in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit like, follow, and stay until the very end. You won't want to miss what happens next. Tmand. The dress had cost her 3 weeks of careful saving. Not because Ariana Vaughn couldn't afford better. She could, technically, if she stopped funneling half her paycheck into shared expenses that somehow always ended up being her responsibility alone. But she had bought it herself, chosen it herself, stood in the dressing room under fluorescent lighting and decided that for one night she was going to look like exactly what she was, a woman who had earned her place. The dress was deep navy, structured at the shoulders, simple enough to be professional, and fitted enough to remind anyone who looked that she hadn't spent the last 6 years grinding inside a mid-tier marketing firm just to disappear into the wallpaper. Ethan had glanced at it when she came out of the bathroom. "That the best you could do?" he'd said. He was already loosening his collar, already half distracted by his phone, already somewhere else. She had looked at him standing in the hotel room mirror. Good jaw, easy charm, the particular kind of handsome that read as effortless in rooms full of people, and said nothing. She had learned a long time ago that saying nothing costs less than saying the wrong thing. "You look fine," he'd added, not looking up from his screen. "Don't overthink it." She hadn't said anything to that either. The Grand Harbor Ballroom sat on the 42nd floor of the Meridian Tower, and on a clear night the city spread beneath its windows like something out of a film. Lights fractured across the harbor, the dark line of the water cutting through everything, bridges strung with white like thread pulled taut between 2 points. Ariana had been to events here before, smaller ones, corporate dinners she attended as Ethan's +1 rather than as a professional in her own right. She knew the drill. Smile at the right people. Don't talk too long about her own work. Let Ethan lead. Tonight was different. Tonight was the Harbor Business Excellence Gala. 500 attendees, every table occupied by someone with a name worth knowing. The guest list included city council members, a state senator, 2 federal judges, and enough CEOs and venture capitalists to reshape the regional economy over a single dinner service. The invitation had come through Ariana's firm. Technically, she had managed 3 of the sponsor accounts attached to this event, but Ethan had been the one to present it as his access. He always was. She stepped out of the elevator and the ballroom opened around her like something staged. Chandeliers dripped crystals 40 feet overhead. The tables were dressed in white and gold, each centerpiece a tower of pale flowers and candlelight. A string quartet worked through something classical near the far wall, barely audible beneath the layered noise of 500 conversations happening simultaneously. Servers moved through the crowd like water finding channels, silver trays balanced, white-gloved and silent. Ariana took it in for exactly 3 seconds before Ethan's hand found the small of her back. Not tender, not protective, the grip of a man marking a position, and steered her toward the cluster of people near the bar. "There's Weston," he said quietly. "Stay close, but let me open." Weston Alcott ran the Regional Development Board and had more pullover zoning and city contracts than the mayor cared to admit publicly. Ethan had been trying to get a proper introduction for 7 months. Ariana had worked 3 campaigns directly adjacent to Alcott's office, had produced the materials that landed the waterfront redevelopment account, had written the strategy brief that Ethan had presented to the board under his own name at the quarterly review. "Of course," she said. She said it the way she said most things to Ethan these days. Flat, drained of inflection, preserved on the surface. She watched him cross the room and felt nothing particular except the familiar low-grade exhaustion that had been following her around for so long it had stopped feeling like anything at all. She picked up a glass of water from a passing tray, not wine. She needed her head clear tonight, and turned to scan the room on her own terms. That was when she saw him. He was seated at a table near the center of the ballroom, which was in itself unusual. The most powerful people in rooms like this almost always position themselves at the periphery. Better sight lines, easier exits, less obligation to perform for a crowd. The center was for people who wanted to be watched. But this man didn't look like he wanted anything at all. He looked like the room was simply arranged around him because it understood that was the appropriate relationship. Luca Moretti. She recognized him the way you recognized a storm front moving in from the coast. Not from direct experience, but from accumulated secondhand knowledge. From things said quietly and carefully in hallways and over drinks. From the particular way other people's voices dropped when his name came up. She had seen his photograph twice, maybe 3 times, in the kind of publications that covered power without always being able to say exactly what that power consisted of. He was always photographed at a remove, always suited, always with that same expression that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite indifference, but landed somewhere that both implied and defied either. In person, he was exactly what those photographs suggested, and also something those photographs couldn't capture. He was not physically large. Medium height, lean, the charcoal suit cut so precisely that it seemed less like clothing and more like a decision. Dark hair grayed slightly at the temples, a strong jaw, the kind that age made more defined rather than less. His hands were still on the table in front of him, a glass of something amber at his right. He was not performing attention or engagement the way most people at events like this performed it. The animated gesturing, the leaning in, the performance of interest designed to make the person across the table feel important. He was simply present, and that presence had a specific quality to it, a quality Ariana couldn't immediately name, except to say that the 12 feet of space between herself and his table felt like more than 12 feet. People deferred to him. She could see it in the micro-adjustments of posture, the way conversations paused and reoriented when they crossed his field of vision. The way a city councilman she recognized from 3 different news cycles in the past year had leaned in to speak to him with something that in any other context might read as deference, but in this context read unmistakably as the thing it was. A smaller person being careful not to waste a larger person's time. Luca Moretti was not a legitimate businessman. Everybody in the city knew this, and nobody said it in public. His family had operated across the eastern seaboard for 2 generations, controlled interests in port logistics, commercial real estate, construction contracts, and private financing arrangements that the right lawyers could render technically legal if you understood the right way to look at them. He also ran, by all visible accounts, several entirely legitimate businesses: a hospitality group, a property development company, a private investment fund, and those businesses were, by measurable standards, well-managed and successful. The complicated part was the part that wasn't visible. Ariana knew this the way most people in professional circles knew it, abstractly, at a comfortable distance, in the way you know that the fish you're eating came from somewhere you'd prefer not to think about in detail. It wasn't relevant to her evening. She looked away. Ethan returned to her side with a smile she recognized as the one he used when things were going well for him. "Alcott's good," he said. "I'll introduce you later if there's a moment, but don't push it." She turned to look at him. He was already scanning the room again, cataloging. Always cataloging. "The Hargrove campaign," she said. "That's my work, he knows. If you introduce me, I should be the one speaking to it." Ethan's smile didn't exactly fall. It recalibrated. "You want to lead with that? In a room like this?" "It's my work, Ethan. It's the firm's work," he said easily. "And I'm the one who kept that account from walking when it almost walked, so let's not rewrite history." She knew the version he was going to tell, and she knew it was not entirely false. He had made a call, one call, to a client who had been about to leave. A client who had been about to leave because the service had deteriorated, which had happened because Ethan had deprioritized the account for 3 months while he pursued a new business lead that ultimately didn't convert. He had made the call that preserved the account, and that was real. And she had built everything that account consisted of, every piece of strategy, every creative direction, every measurable result that gave him something worth preserving, and that was also real. These 2 real things coexisted in permanent, unacknowledged tension. "Fine," she said. She drank her water. He moved on. The dinner service began at 8, and by 9 the room had shifted into its later rhythm. The eating finished, the drinking accelerating, conversations looser and louder and less carefully managed. Ariana had worked the table well, she knew she had. 2 people at her end of the seating had asked for her card. A woman named Dana Cho, who ran a nonprofit consortium she'd vaguely heard of, had leaned across a water glass to tell her that the community reinvestment campaign she'd overheard Ariana describing sounded like exactly the kind of strategic thinking her organization had been trying to find. They had talked for 11 minutes straight, which was 11 minutes more than Ariana had talked to anyone professionally in months without someone interrupting to redirect credit elsewhere. Dana had pressed her card into Ariana's palm with two hands, which was the kind of gesture that meant something. Ariana folded it into her clutch and felt, for the first time in a long time, like maybe the evening hadn't been a waste. Then the speeches started. The program called for 3 speakers and a brief awards presentation. The first 2 speakers were the kind of efficient and forgettable that every industry event produced in bulk. The third was Councilman Reeves, who was brief and moderately charming. The awards presentation was for community partnership excellence. And after it finished, the MC returned the floor to open remarks, which in practice meant an open microphone available for anyone who wanted to offer a toast or recognition. Most people at events like this understood that the open microphone was a social hazard. The people who used it well used it briefly. The people who used it badly didn't know they were using it badly, which was the defining feature of that category. Ethan had been drinking since the cocktail hour. She had tracked it without tracking it, the way she tracked most things about him. Peripherally, automatically, the way you monitor a low-grade weather system because you've learned from experience that low-grade systems sometimes escalate without warning. 4 drinks at minimum, possibly 5. His voice had the particular quality it got when he was drunk and feeling wronged about something. Expansive, performative, looking for an audience. She saw him move toward the microphone before she understood what she was seeing. By the time she understood what she was seeing, it was already too late to intervene without creating exactly the scene she was trying to prevent. Ethan took the microphone with the easy confidence of a man who had spent his whole life in rooms that received him well, and had therefore never learned what it felt like when a room didn't. "I just want to say," he began, and his voice carried well. The sound system was good. The room had quieted the way rooms do when someone takes a microphone unexpectedly. "I want to say a few words about the marketing industry, specifically about the kind of people who work in it." Ariana's glass was on the table. She didn't pick it up. "I've been in this business for 12 years, Ethan continued, and I will tell you the dirty secret that nobody puts in the industry reports. The dirty secret is that half the people in marketing are basically professional pretenders. They dress it up in strategy decks and brand frameworks and enough jargon to fill a textbook, and what's underneath is mostly gut instinct dressed up in expensive language." There was scattered laughter. Knowing laughter. The kind that comes from people who recognize the genre and aren't yet sure whether it's benign. "And I say this with love," Ethan added, "because some of those people are people I know personally, people I've supported, people I've helped advance their careers." He paused for the kind of beat that a man believes is comedic timing. "Like my girlfriend over there." The room turned to look at Ariana. She did not move. Ariana Vaughn, ladies and gentlemen. 6 years in the industry, and she still gets nervous before every pitch meeting. 6 years in, and she still second-guesses every strategy until someone, usually me, tells her it's fine and to just go with it. He chuckled. "Sweetheart, you do good work, you do. But you gotta admit, without someone to push you out of your own head, you'd still be on version 14 of the same deck." The laughter was wider now. Uncomfortable in places, genuine in others, the particular mixture of reactions that crowds produce when they're not sure whether they're witnessing cruelty or affection and default to treating it as affection because that requires less from them. Ariana sat very still. She was aware of the blood in her face, aware of the particular way the room was arranged around her in this moment. 500 people, the chandeliers, the white tablecloths, Dana Cho 3 seats away with an expression that had closed into something careful and watchful. She was aware of the way Ethan was still talking, adding something about how the industry needed more people who could execute and fewer people who overthought, delivering the kind of half-apology that was designed to look like a compliment while leaving the wound exactly where it had been placed. She was aware of something else. Somewhere in the center of the ballroom, a man had gone very still. She didn't look at him. She was not going to look at him or at anyone. She was going to sit in this chair and wait for this to be over. And then she was going to get through the rest of the evening, and then she was going to go home, and she was going to figure out everything else later when she wasn't in front of 500 people. That was the plan. Then Ethan laughed. A specific laugh, loose and a little mean. the laugh that lived underneath the charming one that most people saw, and said, "I mean, the girl can't even order dinner without asking me what I think she should get." And something in Ariana Vaughn's chest, some mechanism that had been under sustained and increasing pressure for a very long time, simply gave way. She stood up. The motion was clean and unhurried. She pushed her chair back from the table, straightened, and when she was standing, she was aware that the room had shifted. Not silent exactly, but quieter, the way rooms get when they sense that the nature of what's happening has changed. "Ethan," she said. Her voice was level. Quiet enough that it shouldn't have carried, but something in the quality of it cut through the ambient noise of 500 people like a blade through water. "Give me the microphone." He blinked. For a moment he actually looked uncertain, which was an expression she had almost never seen on his face. "Ree, come on!" "Give me the microphone." He handed it to her. She wasn't sure if he did it because part of him believed she wasn't really going to do what she was about to do, or because some older, more careful part of him recognized that the room had shifted and he needed to understand in which direction before he made another move. Either way, he handed it to her, and she brought it to her lips, and the room went fully, comprehensively quiet. "Thank you," she said, and her voice through the sound system was even and clear and carried something in it that wasn't anger exactly, wasn't the explosive thing that people expected in these moments, but was harder than that, colder and more controlled. "I'm Ariana Vaughn. Some of you know my work, even if you know it under someone else's name." The room held its breath. The Hargrove Waterfront Campaign, the Metro Transit Equity Initiative, the Harbor Community Investment Series that ran across 3 consecutive years and increased regional nonprofit donor engagement by 43%. Those are mine. The strategy, the creative direction, the client relationships, the results, all of it. "Bo iki pas tin." She paused. "I built those campaigns the way I build everything I build, carefully, obsessively, with more revisions than most people have patience for, because I believe that what you put your name on should actually be worth it." She looked at Ethan. He had gone very still. "I have spent 6 years in a professional relationship, and a personal one with someone who convinced me that my compulsive attention to quality was a weakness, that needing to believe in what I produced before I called it finished was a flaw, that second-guessing myself was the same thing as lacking confidence." She heard her own voice and was surprised by how steady it was. How steady and how sharp. He was wrong about all of it. I was very good at my job before I met him, and I was less good at it every year I let him define what good looked like. Somewhere in the crowd, someone made a sound, not a laugh, not quite, something shorter than that, involuntary. "The dinner comment," she continued, "about not being able to order without asking him. That's accurate. I do that. I ask because he makes it difficult to have preferences, because preferences mean having something he can dismiss, and over enough years of having things dismissed, you start to preemptively outsource the small decisions because it costs less." She paused. "I'm aware of how that sounds. I'm aware of what it cost me to learn that pattern well enough to describe it out loud." Ethan's face was something she had never seen before. Stripped of the easy smile, the effortless charm, it was just a face. And it was the face of a man who had been comfortable for a very long time in a room that was no longer comfortable. "I am leaving this relationship tonight," Ariana said. "I am leaving this relationship, and I am leaving the habit I built of making myself smaller so that someone else could feel larger. I'm telling you this publicly because he chose to do this publicly, and I think the least I can do is give him the same transparency." She set the microphone down on the nearest table cleanly, without ceremony. "Thank you for listening. I apologize for the interruption." She walked toward the doors. The room was silent for exactly 4 seconds. Then the applause started, not from everyone, but from enough people that it built before it scattered. A wave of reaction she felt in her back and her shoulders as she moved across the ballroom floor, not fast, not running, not fleeing, just walking. She did not look back at Ethan. She did not look at the center table. She went through the main doors and into the corridor, and then through the corridor and into the elevator lobby, and she pressed the button for the lobby and leaned against the cool marble wall and breathed. Her hands were shaking. She hadn't noticed that while she was speaking. She noticed it now. Both hands, a fine sustained trembling that had nothing to do with cold, that was the body releasing what the mind had been managing. She pressed her palms flat against the marble and focused on the temperature of it, ground herself against the physical reality of the surface, and breathed out. The elevator opened. She didn't get in. She let it close again. The corridor outside the elevator lobby connected to a side exit that opened onto the building's fountain courtyard, a semicircular terrace overlooking the harbor, lit at night with low ground lighting, a single large fountain in the center that had been turned down to a murmur for the evening. She had noticed it earlier when they arrived, registered it as the kind of space a hotel put between the lobby and the noise, when they understood that people occasionally needed somewhere to exist that wasn't the lobby or the noise. She pushed through the exit door and the night air hit her all at once. Late autumn, harbor damp, with an edge that went straight through the navy dress and reminded her that the structured shoulders she had bought for their appearance and not their warmth were not, in fact, warm. She crossed her arms, pulled in a breath, and let it out slowly. The fountain murmured. The city spread beyond the low terrace wall, lights across the water. She stood there. She didn't cry. She had expected to, had been braced for it in the elevator lobby, but it didn't come. What she felt instead was something that didn't have a clean name, not relief, not grief, not triumph. A strange compound thing, the particular emotional texture of having said the true thing out loud for the first time after saying the false thing for so long, you had stopped being sure which was which. She had said the true thing, in front of 500 people, with a microphone, at the Harbor Business Excellence Gala. She had said the true thing about her own life, and now she was standing in a fountain courtyard in a dress that cost 3 weeks of careful saving, shaking slightly, alone. She heard the door behind her open. She did not turn around. She assumed it was Ethan, or someone from the ballroom staff, or someone who had followed to check on her in the way people checked on you after scenes, which meant well, and which she didn't have any capacity for right now. "Miss Vaughn." The voice was not Ethan's. It was low, measured, carrying a cadence that was precise without being rehearsed, the kind of voice that had been trained somewhere along the way in the management of rooms, of people, of the space between silence and speech. She turned. Luca Moretti stood 2 steps outside the courtyard door. He was alone. No aide, no security she could see, though she had a feeling that security was nonetheless a present variable. He held a glass of the amber liquid from the table, which he had apparently carried out with him. His expression was the same expression she had catalogued from across the ballroom, composed in a way that wasn't emotional management, but was more fundamental than that, more structural. The composure of a man who had decided long ago that the world was going to see exactly what he chose for it to see and nothing else. He looked at her for a moment and then he said, "That took courage." She stared at him. "I don't want to be told it took courage," she said, before she could think about whether that was the right thing to say. "I'm aware that it took courage. Courage means you were afraid to do it, and you did it anyway. And all I can tell you is that I was very afraid and I did it anyway, and I would prefer not to have the fear acknowledged right now." Something in his expression shifted. Not quite a smile, something that lived in approximately the same territory as a smile without being soft. "Fair enough," he said. He took 2 steps forward and leaned against the terrace railing, not standing next to her exactly, at an angle, looking out at the harbor rather than at her, which she registered as a deliberate choice that removed the dynamic of being studied. "You ran the Harbor Community Investment Series," he said. It was not a question. She looked at him. "You know that. 3-year campaign, 43% increase in donor engagement." He paused. "The number you gave was accurate, actually, which is unusual in these contexts. People round up." He turned the glass once in his hand. "I've reviewed a substantial amount of your work over the past few years. Not informally." She was quiet for a moment. "What does that mean, not informally?" "It means I have business interests that intersect with several of the sectors your campaigns have targeted, and when work performs well at scale in those sectors, I find out why." He turned slightly toward her, a degree or two, enough to indicate the shift from parallel to addressed. "Your work performs, consistently, across different categories, different client constraints, different budget ranges. That kind of consistency is not common." Ariana looked at him. He was a man she had been aware of from a safe distance for 2 hours. A man whose name had a specific gravity in certain kinds of rooms, and he was standing in a fountain courtyard telling her that he had reviewed her professional work, not informally, and that it performed. She understood that she should have some more complicated reaction to this. She understood that the category of person Luca Moretti represented should produce in her something more guarded than what she was currently feeling. What she was currently feeling was something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Heard. "I built those campaigns," she said. "I know," he said simply. They stood in silence for a moment, not uncomfortable silence, the kind that has its own texture, its own information. "The man with the microphone," Luca said. "How long?" 6 years. He didn't make a sound, but something in the quality of the silence changed. "He'll try to fix it," she said. "In the morning, maybe tonight. He'll tell me I embarrassed him, and then he'll tell me he's sorry. And the order will be important. The accusation first, the apology second, and I'll have spent 12 hours managing my own reaction to the accusation before the apology arrives, so that by the time it arrives, I'm too tired to accurately assess whether it's genuine." "Is that the pattern?" "That's always been the pattern." Luca looked at her steadily. "What are you going to do?" She was quiet for a moment. The fountain murmured. The city sprawled beneath them. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I said the true thing in there, and I meant every word of it, and I still don't entirely know what the next 6 hours look like, let alone the next 6 months." He nodded. Didn't offer a solution. Didn't perform empathy. Just received the information as information. "Have coffee with me," he said. "Not tonight. Next week. I want to talk to you about your work." She looked at him. "That's a strange offer," she said. "I'm aware of that," he said. "It's still a genuine one." The door behind him opened and a hotel staff member appeared, looking between them with the calibrated discretion of someone trained to handle the aftermath of scenes without visibly acknowledging that scenes had occurred. "Miss Vaughn, Mr. Mercer is asking if you'd like your things brought out, or I'll get them myself," she said. "In a few minutes." The staff member withdrew. Ariana looked back at Luca Moretti, this man with his amber glass and his charcoal suit, and the particular gravity of him standing in a fountain courtyard at 11:15 at night, like a man who had all the time in the world and very clear ideas about how it should be spent. "One coffee," she said. He reached into his inner jacket pocket and produced a card. Simple, white, no company name, just a number in clean black type. She took it. He inclined his head, not quite a bow, something more minimal than that, and turned and walked back through the door and let it fall closed behind him. She stood alone at the fountain. The city pulsed below her, indifferent and electric, and in her hand she held a card with no name on it, and in her chest something that had been locked for a very long time had just, without permission, without warning, begun to unlock. She didn't know yet what was on the other side of it. She should go back inside. She should get her things and get a car and let the night end. She should call her sister or her friend Priya, or sleep on a decision before making it, or do any of the 12 reasonable things that presented themselves to a woman standing alone at a fountain at 11:15 at night, having blown up her relationship and her professional reputation in a single 4-minute speech. She folded the card into her clutch beside Dana Cho's. She looked at the city. She thought about 6 years, about version 14 of the same deck, about the particular quality of a silence between two people when one of them has decided not to waste their breath on a response they already know won't be heard. About the 43% number, the real number, the one she had never been in a room to hear acknowledged until tonight. She thought about the way Luca Moretti had said "I know." Simple, without performance. The two least complicated words in the language, carrying, in that moment, more weight than 6 years of qualified praise and second-hand credit. She breathed out. She went back inside. The ballroom was rearranged by the time she returned. People redistributed, conversations reconstituted, the event continuing on with the particular resilience of expensive social gatherings that do not permit genuine disruption. She located her wrap and her clutch and said a quiet goodnight to Dana Cho, who pressed her hand and said nothing except "see you soon," which was exactly the right thing to say. She found Ethan near the bar. He was on his phone, but when he saw her, he put it away, and the expression on his face was the one she had predicted, calibrated, contained, performing a version of concern that was doing multiple jobs simultaneously. "We should go," she said. "Ariana, we should go," she said again. "Not here." He opened his mouth and then closed it, which was unusual, And she realized that the room was doing what rooms do after events, observing, cataloging, assessing the aftermath. And even Ethan, even now, understood that there was no advantage to whatever he had been about to say in public. They took a car back. He was quiet for 6 blocks, which was longer than she had expected. Then he said, "You humiliated me." She looked out the window. "Yes," she said, "in front of everyone in that room. Yes. Do you understand what that does to my reputation? Those are my—" "They know my work," she said, still looking out the window. "A lot of them knew it before tonight, and they just didn't know whose it was." Silence. "I've supported you," he said, and his voice had dropped into a register she knew, the register of genuine grievance, the one that lived underneath the charm and occasionally surfaced when the performance required too much maintenance. "I've supported you every step of the way, and you—" "Ethan," she turned to look at him. "Not tonight." He held the eye contact for a moment, then he looked away. She turned back to the window. The city moved past her in lights. In her clutch was a plain white card with no name on it. In her chest was the strange, unlocked thing, and she didn't know if it was relief or grief or something that didn't have a name yet, but she felt it, and that itself was different from how she'd felt for a very long time. Tomorrow would be complicated. The day after would be complicated. But tonight she had said the true thing, and a man whose name moved rooms had looked at her in a fountain courtyard and said, "I know." And something in the deep architecture of Ariana Vaughan's sense of herself had shifted, quietly and permanently, in a direction she couldn't yet see the end of. She was still shaking, very slightly, when the car pulled up to the building. She got out without waiting for Ethan to open the door. She had stopped waiting for that a long time ago. The apartment was on the 14th floor of a building that had seemed like a good idea 3 years ago when they signed the lease together, back when the idea of together still carried enough forward momentum to make shared decisions feel like progress rather than entrapment. It was a good apartment. That was the frustrating part. High ceilings, the original hardwood from whenever the building had last been renovated. Windows that ran floor to ceiling on the east wall and caught the morning light in a way that had made Ariana's chest do something the first time she stood in it. She had put her hands on those windows and looked out at the city and thought, yes, this is the kind of place a person builds a real life in. She understood now that the apartment had always been more hers than his, in the way things become yours when you're the one who maintains them, and that ownership had never once been acknowledged. Ethan came in behind her and went straight to the kitchen. She heard the refrigerator open, the particular sound of a beer bottle being uncapped against the edge of the counter, which was a habit she had asked him to stop 4 times because it was damaging the countertop edge, and which he had never stopped. She set her clutch on the table by the door. She took off her heels and held them in one hand. She stood in the entryway for a moment and looked at the apartment, the bookshelves she had organized, the print on the wall she had chosen, the throw on the couch she had bought because he was always cold and complained about it, and never once thought to buy one himself. And she breathed. He came back from the kitchen with the bottle. "You want to explain what tonight was about?" he said. "Not particularly. Because I think you owe me an explanation." She looked at him. He was standing in the center of the living room, jacket still on, bottle in hand, and the particular energy off him was the one she had learned to read over 6 years the way you learn to read weather. The tight jaw, the slightly elevated stance, the performance of calm that was managing a significant amount of material underneath. "I don't owe you an explanation for defending myself," she said. "Defending yourself." He said it like he was tasting the phrase and finding it inaccurate. "I made a joke, Ariana. I was being— You told 500 people that I can't function without you. I was being affectionate." "You were being affectionate," she repeated. "Yes." She set her heels down on the floor, carefully, with a precision that had nothing to do with the heels and everything to do with managing the thing that was rising in her chest. Which part was affectionate, Ethan? The part about version 14? The part about not being able to order dinner? Because I want to understand the affection, specifically, so I can learn to recognize it. His jaw tightened. "Don't do this." "Do what?" "This thing you do, the precise thing, where you take everything apart and lay it out like evidence and then stand there while I—" He stopped, drank from the bottle. "I had 4 drinks, and I made a bad joke. That's it. That does not justify what you did in that room." "What did I do in that room?" You made me look like an abuser." The word landed between them. She looked at him carefully, at the way he'd said it, not with shame, not with the particular weight of a man confronting a word and finding in it something he recognizes about himself, but with the defensive anger of a man who has been accused of something he genuinely believes does not apply to him because the definition he's working with is a narrower one than the reality he's been living inside. "I didn't use that word," she said. "You didn't have to. I described what happened. I used accurate verbs. If the accurate verbs produced a particular picture, Ariana." His voice dropped, lower, quieter. The register that usually preceded the version of him she found hardest to argue with, not the loud defensive one, the soft one, the one that performed hurt. "I love you. Whatever you think tonight was, I love you. And you stood up in front of every person in that room who matters to either of our careers, and you made a speech about what a terrible person I am, and I'm asking you to help me understand what I'm supposed to do with that." She looked at him for a long moment. She knew this move. She had known it for 4 years. The shift from aggression to vulnerability, the pivot that required her to stop prosecuting and start comforting, that transformed a conversation about his behavior into a conversation about his feelings, and that always landed the weight of the situation back on her to manage. "I'm going to sleep in the other room tonight," she said. She picked up her heels and walked to the bedroom. He didn't follow her. She heard him later moving through the apartment, yet the television on low, the refrigerator again, the specific acoustic footprint of a man making himself comfortable in his own sense of grievance. She lay on top of the covers in the dark and looked at the ceiling and felt the shaking in her hands again, the fine, sustained trembling she had suppressed through the car ride in the entryway. And this time she didn't press it flat against anything. She let it move through her. She breathed. She thought about the card in her clutch. She didn't take it out. She thought about it instead, thought about the precise economy of that exchange in the fountain courtyard, the way Luca Moretti had produced information about her work with the same register other people used for weather, factual, and unembellished, as though the fact of her talent was simply a data point he had processed, and had no particular need to inflate for her benefit or his own. She thought about how different that was from the way Ethan talked about her work when he talked about it at all. She did not sleep for a long time. In the morning, Ethan made coffee. This was the thing she had never been able to fully account for in the architecture of their 6 years, that he made coffee, that he made it well, that he brought her a cup without being asked, that the version of him that existed in the morning before the day applied its particular pressures was a version she had originally believed was the real one, the one the rest of it was a departure from. She had spent a significant amount of time and energy maintaining that belief because the alternative was to accept that all the versions were equally real, which was a more complicated and less navigable truth. He set the coffee on the nightstand. He sat on the edge of the bed. He looked at his own hands. "I'm sorry," he said. She had her hands around the mug. The heat of it was something to hold on to. "Which part?" "The microphone thing. That was—" He exhaled. "I had too much to drink and I said something I thought was funny and it landed wrong and I should have known better. I know that. I know how those rooms work." "It didn't land wrong," she said. "It landed exactly where you aimed it." He looked at her. "You know how I know?" she continued. "Because drunk Ethan and sober Ethan say different things but the same true things. You believe what you said. You've been saying the versions of it to me for 6 years, just more carefully, with better timing." Silence. "You think I've been—" He stopped. His voice changed. Something moved across his face, complex and quick, gone before she could classify it. "You genuinely think I've been deliberately doing this to you?" "I think you learned a pattern that works for you," she said. "I think it's worked so long and so well you don't think of it as a pattern anymore. I think you believe you've been supportive. I think you've constructed a version of our relationship in which you are the thing that made me possible. And I think last night you just said that version out loud in front of an audience and were surprised I disagreed." He stood up. "I'm not doing this," he said. "I came in here to apologize and you said the apology. I heard it. But you're not accepting it." She looked up at him. "I'm not accepting it," she agreed. He left. The bedroom door didn't quite slam. He stopped it. She could hear him stop it. The particular sound of a hand catching a door before it fully closes. Because even now, even in this, the management of perception didn't fully switch off. She heard him in the kitchen, the sound of the coffee mug going into the sink with slightly too much force. She drank her coffee. She looked at the morning light on the floor. She thought about what she was going to do next. She called her friend Priya at 7:45, and Priya answered on the second ring because Priya was the kind of person who answered on the second ring always, which was one of the things Ariana valued most about her. "I saw it," Priya said before Ariana had gotten through a sentence. "Already." "Someone posted a clip. It's been shared." A pause. "Ariana, it's been shared a lot." She sat with that for a moment. "How much is a lot?" "Enough that you should probably think about what you want to say publicly, or whether you want to say anything." "I wasn't thinking about the public part." "I know you weren't, but it's there now." Another pause, warmer. "You okay?" "I don't know yet." "Do you need to come here?" "Not yet. Maybe later." She ended the call and sat on the edge of the bed and opened her phone and searched her own name. The clip was 47 seconds. Someone in the ballroom had recorded it on their phone, just the speech, beginning when she asked for the microphone and ending just after she set it down. The framing was slightly off-center, slightly shaky, the audio quality imperfect, but the words were clear. She watched it once. She put the phone face down on the mattress. The comment section was not something she looked at. She understood that the comment section was a separate country with its own climate and its own logic, and that visiting it would not add anything useful to her morning. She had a coffee meeting she needed to either cancel or keep. She had a work inbox that was going to require attention. She had a relationship that was detonating in room by room around her, and which required some kind of management, whether or not she had the capacity for management. And she had a plain white card in her clutch with a number on it. She called Dana Cho first. Dana picked up and said, without preamble, "I watched the whole thing. I want to take you to lunch next week. Not for pity, because I meant what I said about the strategy conversation, and I meant it more after that speech than I did before it." Ariana closed her eyes. "Thursday?" "Thursday works." She spent the next 3 days navigating the specific geography of a relationship ending in a shared space. Ethan cycled through the expected terrain, the second apology, more elaborate than the first, with more granular acknowledgement of specific wrongs that was nonetheless somehow still positioned as an argument for why the apology should be accepted and things restored. Then the retraction, when the acceptance didn't come. The version where the apology was conditionally withdrawn pending her acknowledgement of what she had done to him. Then something that resembled genuine confusion, which she found hardest to manage. The version of him that seemed actually unable to understand how 6 years of small erosions had accumulated into the things she had described from the microphone. She did not fight with him. She found she didn't have the energy for it, not because she was defeated, but because the fuel for the fight had been consumed by the speech itself, burned off in that 4-minute expenditure of everything she'd been holding. And what was left on the other side of it was not anger, but a strange, clear-eyed tiredness that felt more like resolution than grief. On the 4th day, he left for 3 nights at his colleague Marcus's apartment, which he announced as a choice he was making to give her space, which was also, she understood, a test to see if the space would produce in her the anxiety that had reliably produced accommodation in the past. It did not. She cleaned the apartment. She reorganized the bookshelf according to her own system, which was different from the system she'd used when she was trying to account for his preferences. She made dinner for herself at 9 o'clock at night and ate it standing at the kitchen window, looking out at the city, and it was the best meal she'd had in months simply because of the quality of the silence it was eaten in. On the 3rd evening alone, she called the number on the plain white card. He answered on the 2nd ring. "Vaughn," she said. "I know." His voice had the same quality it had in the courtyard, level, unhurried, taking up exactly the space it needed, and no more. "Thursday morning, 8 o'clock. There's a place on Mercer called Elan, small, quiet. Tell them my name at the door." "That's very specific for a plan we hadn't confirmed." "I had a feeling," he said. A pause. Not uncomfortable. "Thursday," she said. "Thursday," he agreed. Helen was on a quiet block between a bookstore and an architecture firm, the kind of establishment that existed at the intersection of low profile and expensive, with no menu in the window and a handful of tables visible through the glass, each with enough space between them that a conversation could happen privately. She arrived at 8:02 and gave his name at the door, and was taken to a corner table where Luca Moretti was already seated, jacket on, a small espresso in front of him, a second cup waiting. She sat. He looked at her across the table, and she noticed for the first time, in daylight, in a small room, that his eyes were a very dark brown, almost black, and carried something in them that she had been trying to name since the courtyard, a quality of attention, precise and unhurried, the look of a man who had learned that the most important information in any room arrived in the details other people dismissed. "How's the fallout?" he said. "Manageable," she said. "The clip circulated. I've gotten calls from people I haven't spoken to in 2 years. I'm still figuring out which of those are genuine. Most aren't. I know. The ones that are will make themselves clear over time." She wrapped her hands around the coffee cup. "Is that experience or philosophy?" "Experience," he said, "consistently." They talked for 2 hours. She had expected the conversation to have a different quality, more formal, more careful, weighted with the particular dynamic of what he was and what that meant, the specific social calculus of a woman having coffee with a man whose name had that specific kind of gravity. What she found instead was a conversation that moved the way good conversations moved, following its own logic, doubling back, opening into unexpected territory, and then settling into something specific and useful. He knew her work in detail. Not surface-level familiar, granular, specific, the kind of familiarity that came from having actually studied something rather than having been briefed on it. He asked questions about the Harbor series that got at structural choices she had made deliberately, and which had never, in any professional context she could recall, been noticed by anyone else. He understood the difference between campaigns that generated visibility and campaigns that generated measurable behavioral change. And he understood that she had always been working toward the second category, even when the brief called for the first. "Why marketing?" he said at some point in the second hour. "Not as a condescension. I'm asking specifically." She considered it. Because the gap between what something is and how it's understood is where everything either happens or doesn't. I've always been interested in that gap. The gap between reality and perception. Yes. "That's a useful thing to be interested in," he said, "in most professions." She looked at him. "Including yours?" He looked back at her, and the almost smile was there again, brief, residing in the corners of his expression rather than the center of it. "Including mine," he said. He refilled her coffee from the carafe the server had left, a small gesture, unhurried, and then set the carafe back without making the gesture into anything more than it was. "I want to talk to you about something professional," he said. "Okay. I have a portfolio of interest," he said. "Some of them are structured in ways that allow for, and in some cases require, significant public-facing work. Community engagement, social impact. The kind of strategic communication work that requires someone who understands both the actual substance and the perception architecture." He paused. "I've been trying to fill that function for 2 years. I have not found anyone who could do both." She was quiet. "You could do both," he said. It was not flattery. It was the same register as the 43% number, a data point delivered without inflation. "What would that look like?" she said carefully. "A dedicated division, your structure, your team, enough resources that you're not compromising the work to meet a budget. And the output serves your interests." "My legitimate interests," he said. "Yes?" She held his gaze. "I need to understand where the line is." He nodded, not defensively, not performing offense at the implication, just nodding, which meant he had expected the question and found it appropriate. "You would have access to our operational council," he said. "Full transparency on the structure of what you'd be working within. Any engagement you're not comfortable with, you decline. In writing, if that's cleaner for you." "You'd give me that in writing." "I'd put anything in writing that made you confident enough to do the work well," he said. "Confidence and function are not separate things." She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the bookshelf she had reorganized, the dinner eaten standing at the kitchen window, the specific quality of a silence that belonged to her. "I'm not going to decide today," she said. "I'm not asking you to," he said. She nodded. She finished her coffee. She looked out the window at the quiet block with the bookstore and the architecture firm and the morning moving past on the street outside. "I'll need to think about a lot of things," she said. "Yes," he agreed. She stood to go, and he stood as she did. A small courtesy, old-fashioned, precise. And she gathered her coat and her bag and looked at him one more time across the small table with the daylight coming in. "Same number?" she said. "Same number," he said. She walked out into the morning. She got half a block before her phone rang. The name on the screen was Ethan's. She looked at it for 3 full seconds. The city moving around her, the morning traffic, someone somewhere nearby with a coffee. And she watched her own thumb hover over the screen and understood, with the particular clarity of someone standing at a threshold, that whichever direction she moved from this spot was a direction she would not be moving back from. She hit decline. She kept walking. But that night, when she came back to the apartment, Ethan was there. Not his normal there, not settled in there, but the particular there of a man who had been waiting, who had something prepared, who had arranged himself and his words and his expression in advance. He was on the couch. He had the television off. He had not opened a beer. "I got an email," he said. She set her bag down. "From Hargrove's office," he said. "From the account director." He held up his phone, and across the room she could see the screen, could see the name in the subject line, and her stomach contracted because she knew what that email was before she read a word of it. "They want to restructure the account management. Apparently they had a conversation this week. Danicho's consortium reached out about a joint campaign." Det sa till mamshemisem. He paused. "And they specifically asked that you be the lead contact going forward." The apartment was very quiet. "Not the firm," he said. "You, by name." She looked at him. "They copied me because I'm currently listed as account lead," he said. "And they wanted to be transparent that they're recommending the change to your firm's management. They said," he looked at the phone, "they said they've always valued your strategic vision and that recent developments have clarified for them that they'd like to formalize that relationship more directly." She stood perfectly still. "Recent developments," Ethan said, and the quality of his voice had changed now, had become something stripped of the careful management, something raw in a way she hadn't heard before. Not manufactured vulnerability, but actual exposure. "You did this on purpose. Ethan, you planned this, the speech, the clip, getting your name out there before you—" "I didn't plan anything," she said. "You picked up a microphone. And now you're leveraging it." He stood. "You have been building an exit strategy, and I missed it because I thought—" He stopped. Something crossed his face. "I thought you needed me. I actually thought that." She looked at him. Not with cruelty, not with satisfaction, with something that cost more than either of those. "I did need you," she said, "for a long time. That was real. And I needed you to not do what you did with what I gave you, and you did it anyway, and here we are." He said nothing. "I'm going to take the meeting with Hargrove," she said. "I'm going to take it as myself. And I think you know this apartment needs to work differently going forward, because I can't—" She stopped, chose the words. "I can't keep living in a space that's been calibrated for your comfort at the cost of mine." He stared at her. His phone was still in his hand, the email still on the screen. And behind his eyes she could see it. Not the anger she expected, not the performance of grievance, but something older and more fundamental, the dawning recognition of a man who has confused being needed with being valued, and who is beginning to understand for the first time in full the distance between those two things. He sat back down on the couch, slowly, like a man whose legs had made a decision his mind was still catching up to. She went to the bedroom. She did not sleep for a long time. And somewhere across the city, in a building she had never been inside, she understood that a decision was forming in her that had been forming since the fountain courtyard, since the plain white card, since the coffee table and the second cup waiting, and that the decision was nearly finished forming, and that when it finished there would be no version of her previous life with enough structural integrity left to return to. She lay in the dark and listened to the city. The threshold was right there. She was already halfway through it. The Hargrove meeting was on a Tuesday. Ariana arrived 7 minutes early, which was her standard, and sat in the lobby of the Hargrove Group's downtown offices with her portfolio on her knees, and the particular quality of stillness she had developed over years of walking into rooms where she had to prove something before she could say anything. The lobby was glass and pale stone, the kind of corporate aesthetic that spent a great deal of money communicating that it had not spent a great deal of money. A young assistant brought her water she didn't ask for and smiled with the professional warmth of someone who had been told to be warm. She had prepared thoroughly. Not the over-preparation she used to do in the Ethan years, the version 14, the compulsive revision that was less about quality and more about preemptively managing his potential criticism. This was different, cleaner, the preparation of someone who knew the material and was organizing it rather than defending it. She had a strategy framework. She had 3 years of performance data. She had Dana Cho's endorsement in an email she could produce if needed, though she didn't think she would need it. Marcus Webb, the Hargrove account director, met her himself rather than sending someone, which was a signal she noted without making too much of it. "Ariana," he said, and extended his hand and shook hers with the grip of a man who had made a decision and was comfortable with it. "We're glad you came in." The meeting lasted 90 minutes. By the end of it, she was the lead strategic contact on the Hargrove account, which was worth more annually than her current full salary, and Marcus Webb had mentioned twice, unprompted, that they were interested in exploring an expanded engagement once she had her independent structure in place. She walked out into the afternoon and stood on the sidewalk and let the city move around her for a moment. Then she called Priya. "I need to tell you something," she said when Priya picked up. "Good something or complicated something?" "Both," Ariana said. "Mostly good, I think." She didn't tell Priya about Luca Moretti yet. She wasn't ready to navigate that conversation, the specific geography of explaining to someone who loved her that she was considering a professional arrangement with a man whose name had a particular kind of weight in particular kinds of rooms. She would tell Priya. She just needed to understand her own position first, clearly enough to explain it. What she did over the following 2 weeks was move, not out of the apartment immediately. The logistics of that took planning, took the particular cold-eyed accounting of shared space and shared obligations that she had never had to perform before because she had always, in all previous versions of difficulty, defaulted to accommodation rather than exit. But she began the accounting. She identified what was hers. She found an apartment, smaller, higher floor, a corner unit on the 19th with windows on 2 sides, and she put down a deposit, and she didn't tell Ethan until the lease was signed. He took it badly, not explosively. Ethan didn't do explosive. He did cold, precise, the particular register of a man who experienced rejection as an organizational problem to be managed rather than a grief to be felt. He said, when she told him, "That's fast," he said, "I hope you know what you're doing." He said, "You're going to realize, eventually, that whatever you think you're building out there isn't going to hold together the way you think it will." She said, "Maybe." She moved on a Saturday with Priya and a hired van and 4 hours of focused, efficient physical work that left her sweating and sore and standing in an empty new apartment at 4 in the afternoon with every box labeled and no one else's preferences to account for. Priya opened wine on the floor. They sat with their backs against the wall under the corner windows and drank it and looked out at the city. "Okay," Priya said. "Now tell me the complicated part." So she told her about Luca Moretti. Priya was quiet for a longer time than was comfortable. "I know who he is," Priya said finally. "I know you do." "Ariana." "I know. He's not just... It's not like a reputation thing. My cousin's firm did a title search on one of his property portfolios 2 years ago, and they were told, very politely, by someone they couldn't identify, to file the results and close the matter." Ariana turned the wine glass in her hand. "I understand what he is. Do you? He was direct with me about the structure. He offered full transparency on the operational side. He said anything I was uncomfortable with, I could decline in writing." "He said that?" "Yes." Priya looked at her for a moment. "And you believed him?" "I believed he meant it," Ariana said. "Whether meaning it and delivering it are the same thing is something I'd verify before I signed anything." Priya was quiet again. The city moved in the windows behind them, the late afternoon light going amber across the roof lines. "He's not a good man," Priya said carefully. "I'm not looking for a good man," Ariana said. "I'm looking for someone who tells me the truth about what they are and respects what I am, and doesn't ask me to make myself smaller to fit inside their version of things." Priya looked at her for a long time. Then she picked up her wine glass and touched it against Ariana's. "Okay," she said, "just be careful with where the line is." "I know where the line is." Make sure he does too, Priya said. 2 days later, Luca called. Not a text. A call, which she had noticed was his preference, which told her things about how he operated that she filed without analyzing too deeply. She was unpacking books in the new apartment when the phone rang and she answered it, standing in the middle of the living room with a box of her own books in her arms. Books she had not been able to put on a shelf for 3 years because his system had precedence. I want to show you something, he said. There's an event Thursday evening, a private networking gala. Not public. Invitation only. The kind of room where the people who actually make things happen meet the people who fund them, meeting the people who structure them. I want you to see the kind of network the division would be operating within. Is this a pitch? She said. It's context, he said. You've been making decisions about a structure you've only seen from the outside. I want you to see the inside. She set the books down on the floor. Who else will be there? Investors, entrepreneurs, a few people from city planning, 2 senators probably, though senators are unreliable as confirmed guests. A pause. No one who will make you uncomfortable. She almost said, I'll think about it. The old reflex, the automatic deferral, the purchasing of time that was really purchasing permission. What time? She said instead. The gala was held at a private venue in the north end of the financial district, a converted warehouse space that had been redesigned with the kind of careful, expensive minimalism that communicated serious money to people who understood how serious money communicated. She arrived in a car Luca had sent. She had told him she didn't need him to send one, and he had sent one anyway, not because he wasn't listening, but because his assessment of the situation's logistics had simply overridden the social courtesy of agreement. She had decided not to argue about the car. The room was exactly what he had described. 150 people, maybe, distributed across a space that felt intimate at that number, with the particular energy of a gathering where most people present understood that their proximity to each other was not accidental. She recognized several faces, a city council member, the CFO of a regional bank she'd done peripheral work for, a woman she'd seen on the cover of a business journal. Luca met her at the entrance, not waited at the entrance, met her, which meant he had been watching for her arrival. You look, he started. Don't, she said, because she had learned that she didn't want to hear what she looked like from him. Not yet. Not until she understood the shape of whatever this was well enough to know what that kind of observation would mean inside it. He stopped, accepted it, nodded. Come meet some people, he said. The next 2 hours were the most professionally nourishing she had spent in years. The people Luca introduced her to talked to her with the assumption of competence that she had spent 6 years trying to earn in rooms where it was perpetually withheld. She talked about strategy with a woman who ran a social enterprise accelerator and felt the specific pleasure of a conversation that moved fast because both people in it were operating at the same level. She talked about measurable community impact with a man who ran a foundation's investment arm and had him asking for her framework before she had finished explaining it. She realized, somewhere in the middle of the second hour, good at this. Not adequate. Not competent with support. Good. Genuinely, in a way that required no apology and no inflation and no careful positioning. She was standing at the edge of the room with a glass of water, still not wine at events, still that particular caution, when she became aware of someone beside her. Not Luca. The man was middle-aged, silver-haired, with the particular build of someone who had once been athletic and maintained enough of the frame that it still read in a suit. He had a drink. He was looking at the room rather than at her, which was the same angled approach Luca used in the courtyard, and she noticed that. Ariana Vaughn, he said. She looked at him. You don't know me, he said. My name is Gerald Foss. I'm an attorney. She waited. I represent a number of interests, he said carefully, some of which overlap with Luca Moretti's operational structure. He paused. I'm going to tell you something that you're going to want to hear, and I want to be clear before I tell you that I'm telling you because my interests and Mr. Moretti's interests have recently diverged in a way that makes your situation relevant to me. The room noise continued around them. Someone laughed 30 feet away. The string quartet near the far wall shifted into something new. Say what you're going to say, she said. Foss turned his glass once. The division he's offering you, he said. The social impact division. The structure he described. Your autonomy. Your right of refusal. The transparency. He paused. There is no transparency. The division is designed to function as a compliance buffer. Your name, your reputation, your demonstrably clean professional history would be the public face on a set of financial instruments that are, he chose the word with the precision of a man who had spent a career choosing words. Neat, oui, say, not clean. She was very still. He's been building this for 18 months, Foss continued. He needed someone with your specific profile, not just talented, credible, publicly credible, in a way that his operation isn't and can't be. The Harbor series work, the nonprofit relationships, the clip from the Gala that circulated, he identified you before the Gala, Ariana. The approach in the courtyard was not, "Stop," she said. Her voice came out quieter than she expected, flatter. Foss stopped. She set her water glass down on the nearest surface, carefully, with the same precise care she had set her heels down in the apartment entryway 10 days ago. The careful physical management of a moment when careful physical management was the only thing she could fully control. "How do I know you're telling me the truth?" she said. It was not inflected as a question. "You don't," Foss said. "Yet. I have documentation. Not with me. I'm not going to hand you a folder at a cocktail party. But it exists, and I can get it to you through a channel that will let you verify its integrity independently." He looked at her directly for the first time. "I'm sorry to do this here. I tried to find another way to reach you and couldn't because his people are," he paused, "attentive." She looked back at him. The room continued to move around her. The 150 people, the minimalist warehouse space, the careful money communicating itself in all directions. Across the room, she could see Luca in conversation with two men she didn't recognize. His posture the same as always, composed, present, the precisely calibrated gravity of a man who knew exactly what he was. She thought about the courtyard, the card with no name on it, the coffee table, the second cup already waiting, the specificity of his knowledge of her work, not just familiar with it, granular, structural, the kind of familiarity that came from having actually studied something, having studied her. 18 months. The room tilted very slightly, the way a room tilts when the ground assumption beneath it shifts and the architecture has to recalibrate. "The documentation," she said. "How do I receive it?" Foss produced a card. Plain, no company name, just a number. She looked at it for a moment with a specific awful recognition. Then she took it. He moved away from her without ceremony, absorbed back into the room, and she stood at the edge of the gathering with the card in her hand and something that had been building in her chest. Warm and uncertain, and not quite named, beginning to change into something colder and more familiar, something that felt like the particular weight of a woman who has been here before, who has trusted a version of someone and discovered the real version too late, who has moved towards something that turned out to be arranged. She put the card in her clutch. She found her way to the restroom at the back of the venue, a single-occupancy room with a lock, and she stood at the sink with the water running cold over her hands and looked at herself in the mirror. Her face was composed. She noted this with a remote clinical interest. She felt nothing particularly visible on the surface of herself, which meant the thing happening underneath was going to be very bad when it arrived, and she knew that pattern well enough to know that the arrival was not a matter of if. She breathed. She thought about what Foss had said. She had the lawyer's instinct, the habit of considering the source before the content, of asking who benefits from the information before she decided what the information meant. Foss had been explicit. His interests and Luca's had diverged. That meant he had a reason to damage Luca, which meant the information was not neutral, which meant she could not simply receive it as true, but she also could not simply discard it. She turned off the water, dried her hands, looked at herself one more time. Then she unlocked the door and walked back into the room. Luca was moving toward her across the floor, not urgently, at his standard unhurried pace, but with the directional purpose of a man who has been watching for a development and has seen it. "You talked to Foss," he said. He said it quietly, close to her, in the register of the room, not a public statement. His face had not changed. That was the thing she couldn't read. It never changed. The expression, the composure was too structural for that, and in this moment she needed to read it and couldn't. "Yes," she said. "What did he tell you?" She looked at him. "What do you think he told me?" Something moved through his eyes. She couldn't classify it in the moment. It was quick, and whatever it was, he managed it. Foss has been trying to compromise a negotiation I'm in the middle of for 6 months, he said. He'll use whatever he can access, including you. That's a convenient framing. It's the accurate one. Or it's what you'd say if his framing was the accurate one, she said. A pause. The room moved around them. Come outside, he said. No, she said. Tell me here. Tell me what the division actually is. Not the version you pitched over coffee, the actual structure. What is my name on, specifically? His jaw shifted, almost imperceptibly. This is not the place. You brought me to this place, she said. You told me this was context, so give me the context. He looked at her for a long moment. The composed expression, the dark eyes, the quality of attention she had found compelling and was finding now something else, something she didn't have a word for yet. The division is legitimate, he said, structurally, operationally, legally. What it connects to... He paused. What it connects to is more complicated, and I was going to walk you through that complexity before you made any decision. I was not going to ask you to sign anything before you understood everything. Were you going to tell me you identified me 18 months ago? Silence. Before the gala, she said. Before Ethan picked up the microphone. You knew who I was. He didn't look away. Yes. The word hit the space between them and sat there. She nodded slowly. The particular nod of a woman who has received information she already knew was coming and is deciding what to do with the confirmation. The courtyard, she said, was genuine, he said, and his voice carried for the first time something different from the managed quality of everything else he'd said. Not desperation, not performance, something more basic than that, more exposed. What I said to you was genuine. The coffee was genuine. What I think of your work. You arranged to meet me, she said. The whole evening. You were already there. You'd already identified me. The approach after... I knew who you were, he said. I didn't know what you were. There is a difference. She stared at him. That is an actual distinction, he said. I don't expect you to believe it right now. She picked up her clutch from the table beside her. I need to go, she said. Ariana, I need to go, she said again, and her voice was still level, still that precise controlled quality, but underneath it something had cracked, some load-bearing thing, and she could feel the crack spreading, hairline but definite, through the foundation of everything she had been building herself toward for the past 2 weeks. She walked to the exit. The car he had sent was still outside. She didn't get into it. She walked half a block and called a car herself and stood on the sidewalk in the night air and waited for it, the city around her, the lights across the harbor in the distance. And inside her chest, the unlocked thing that had been moving toward something warm was moving now toward something entirely different. The car arrived. She got in. She did not cry. She sat in the back seat with the city streaming past and her hands flat on her knees, and she thought about 18 months and a courtyard and a plain white card and a second coffee cup already waiting, and she thought about the specific shape of being seen by someone, how rare it was, how much it cost to stop needing it, how precisely you had to have been emptied of it to mistake surveillance for recognition. She got home. She unlocked the new apartment and walked into the space that was hers, finally hers. Boxes still partly unpacked, books still partly on the floor, and she sat down in the middle of it and looked at the corner windows and the city beyond them. Then her phone buzzed. Not a call. A message from a number she didn't recognize. She opened it. It was a document. A single page, photographed. A corporate filing, the kind of dense legal language that took a trained eye to parse. And she did not have a fully trained eye, but she had enough of one to find, on the third line under the subsidiary structure listing, her own name. Her name. Already in the document, filed 6 weeks ago. She stared at the screen. Her name was already in the structure, not as a prospective addition. As an existing officer of record on a subsidiary entity she had never heard of, never agreed to, never signed anything for. Someone had put her name in a legal document without her knowledge and filed it. And whatever that subsidiary connected to was something she did not yet know and could not yet see, but the fact of it, the cold, specific, legally recorded fact of it, meant that the question of whether to trust Luca Moretti, the question of where the line was, The question of how carefully she had been read before she ever walked into a fountain courtyard on the night her life changed, all of those questions had just become the wrong questions entirely. The right question was simpler and much worse. The right question was what had already been done in her name, and whether she could undo it, and what it was going to cost her if she couldn't, and she was sitting alone in an apartment with half-unpacked boxes and her name on a document she had never seen in a structure she didn't understand connected to a man she didn't sleep. She sat on the floor of the half-unpacked apartment with her back against the wall, and her phone in her hand and the document on the screen, and she read it 17 times. Not because reading it again changed what it said, because her mind kept rejecting the information, and she kept forcing it back to the source, the way you press a wound to confirm it's real. Her name, Ariana Vaughn, listed as Chief Communications Officer of a subsidiary entity called Vantara Strategic Communications, LLC, filed 6 weeks ago with the state corporate registry, connected by 3 layers of holding structure to a parent company she had never heard of, which connected through 2 more layers she had to trace manually on her phone at midnight using public registry databases, to a shell entity that shared an registered agent address with 4 other companies, 2 of which had been named in a federal civil asset inquiry 14 months ago that had been quietly closed without resolution. She knew enough to know that quiet closures without resolution were not the same as innocence. They were the same as resources. She put the phone face down on the floor. She breathed. Her first clear thought, after the noise in her head settled enough to produce something usable, was, I need a lawyer. Not Luca's operational counsel. Not anyone connected to any room she had been in recently. Her own lawyer, independent, someone she had found herself. Her second thought was, I need to know who sent me the document. The number that had texted it was no longer active. She tried calling it at 12:47 in the morning and got a disconnection tone. Foss, probably. Or someone working adjacent to Foss. Or someone else entirely. Someone she hadn't met yet. Someone in the architecture of the situation whose position she hadn't mapped. Her third thought was about Ethan. Not warm, not regretful. A cold, functional thought. Ethan worked with a corporate attorney named Shields, who did clean transactional work and had a reputation for discretion. She had met Shields twice at firm events. She had his card somewhere in a box she hadn't unpacked yet. She started opening boxes at 1 in the morning. She found the card at 1:45 in a zippered pocket of a portfolio case she hadn't opened in 8 months. She set it on the kitchen counter and looked at it and decided she would call at 7:30 when offices opened and not before, because calling a corporate attorney at 2 in the morning announced a panic she could not afford to announce. She lay down on the mattress without sheets. The sheets were in a bag she hadn't located, and stared at the ceiling and did not sleep and waited for morning. At 7:29 she called Shields. He was in by 7:45, which told her things about him she filed for later. She described the situation in precise terms, the document, the subsidiary filing, her name as officer of record, the holding structure she had traced. She did not mention Luca Moretti by name in the first call. She described the parent company structure and listened to the specific quality of Shields' silence on the other end. You need to come in, he said. Today. This morning, she said. 10 o'clock, he said. She was there at 9:53. Shields' office was in a building 3 blocks from the courthouse, the kind of functional workspace that communicated nothing decorative, which she respected. He was in his 50s, compact, with the manner of a man who had spent decades receiving bad news professionally, and had developed a specific capability for receiving it without performing a reaction. She put her phone on his desk with the document open. He read it. He read it again. Who filed this? He said. I need to know that too, she said. You didn't sign anything? No engagement letter, no consulting agreement, no preliminary framework document? Nothing. Any verbal agreement that could be construed? No, she said. I had 2 conversations. 1, coffee meeting. I told him explicitly I wasn't deciding anything that day. Shields looked at her over his glasses. Him. She met his eyes. Luca Moretti. The silence that followed had a specific texture. Not surprise, Shields was too experienced for surprise, but a recalibration, a reassessment of the weight class of what she had brought into his office. All right, he said after a moment. Here's what we're doing. First, we file a formal objection to the officer listing with the state registry. That's administrative and it's fast. We can have that submitted by end of day, which starts creating the documented record that you did not authorize this. Second, I need you to write down every interaction you had with Moretti, every conversation, every location, every person present, dates, times, exact language as best you recall. Third, he paused. Third, you need to understand that filing the objection is going to announce to whoever structured this that you know about it. That will produce a response. What kind of response? That depends on what the structure is actually for, he said, and on what Moretti decides to do when he knows you've seen it. She nodded. Do it. She spent 4 hours in Shield's conference room writing down everything. She was thorough. She had always been thorough. She wrote 17 pages in longhand, precise and chronological, and when she was done, she read it back to herself and felt the full architecture of the past 3 weeks assembled in front of her for the first time. Every piece in sequence, and the sequence had a logic to it that was worse than the individual pieces. He had been in the room before she arrived. Every room. She was walking out of the building at 3 in the afternoon when her phone rang. Luca. She looked at the screen for 2 full seconds. She answered. You filed, he said. Yes, she said. I'm not calling to argue about it, he said. I'm calling because there are things you need to know before this escalates, and I need you to hear them from me. I've heard things from you before, she said. I know. A pause, and in the pause, something that might have been, in a man with less control, an exhale. I need 30 minutes. In person. Public place? Your choice. After that, you never have to see me again if that's what you decide. She stood on the sidewalk outside Shield's building with the afternoon traffic moving past her, and the phone against her ear, and the 17 pages of her own handwriting in the portfolio under her arm. Every reasonable instinct she had said no. She said, Delsano's, on Merchant Street, 4 o'clock. She got there first and chose a table against the wall with clear sight lines to both the door and the back exit, which was a choice she had never made in her life before today, and which she made now without thinking about it, the way the body acquires instincts through proximity to situations that require them. He came in at 4 exactly. He saw her immediately. He crossed the room without looking at anything else and sat down across from her, and he looked. She noted this with the remote clinical attention she was using for everything today. Different. Not undone. But something in the managed quality was under more pressure than she had seen before, the composure doing more work than it usually had to. The filing, he said. I didn't do it. She looked at him. I know what that sounds like, he said. I know you have no mechanism to evaluate it, but I need you to hear it anyway. Someone in my organization filed that document without my authorization. I found out when you filed the objection, and my attorney called me. Who? She said. Someone who had access to the structure and a reason to compromise it. His jaw tightened, the most visible physical sign of something underneath she had seen from him. Foss is the obvious candidate. But Foss works through intermediaries, and the direct access required to file this. He stopped. I'm going to find out. I will find out. But right now, that's not the part that matters. It matters to me, she said. My name is on a legal document I didn't authorize. I know. That's not an abstraction. That's my name. That's the thing I have been fighting to have mean something specific on its own terms, and someone used it without... She stopped. Her voice had developed an edge she hadn't intended. She brought it back down. Someone used it. Yes, he said. I know what that cost you. Specifically, I know. And I am telling you that was not something I did or sanctioned. She held his eyes. You identified me 18 months ago, she said. You built an approach. You knew who I was before the gala. Yes. And you're asking me to parse the difference between the parts you authorized and the parts you didn't. Yes, he said. I know how that sounds. It sounds like a man who built a machine and is surprised when the machine does what machines do. He was quiet. She leaned forward slightly. Tell me what the division actually connects to. All of it. Not the version you'd give a prospective employee. The version you'd give someone who already has your subsidiary filing with their name on it sitting with an attorney. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he told her. It took 12 minutes. He spoke without stopping, without the careful management of information delivery she had come to expect from him. And what he described was complicated and uncomfortable and not entirely criminal and not entirely clean, which was the most honest version of what she had expected, and she listened to all of it with her hands flat on the table and her face composed and her chest doing something she wasn't going to allow to interfere with her processing of the information. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "The division itself," she said. "The community impact work. Is it real?" "Yes," he said. "The campaigns would be real. The results would be real." "Yes." "And the name on the structure would be adjacent to things that are not entirely clean," he said. "I was going to tell you that. Before you signed anything, I was going to tell you everything I just told you and let you decide with full information." "You should have told me at the coffee," she said. "Yes," he said. "I should have." The honesty of it, the undefended simplicity of it, landed differently than she expected. "That's it?" she said. "That's your argument? You should have?" "I don't have a better one," he said. "I made a calculation about sequencing that I would make differently now. I can tell you why I made it the way I did, but I can't make it a good reason from where you're sitting." She pushed back from the table slightly. "I need you to do something," she said. "Not for me, practically. I need the officer listing removed from that subsidiary. Today. Whatever it takes, whoever you have to call, I need my name off that document before close of business." "It'll be done by 5, he said. "I need confirmation from my attorney, not from you." "You'll have it." She stood. He stayed seated, which she registered as a deliberate choice, not following, not pursuing, giving her the geometry of exit. "Ariana," he said. She looked at him. "I'm sorry," he said, "for the sequencing, for what it cost you to find out the way you did." She looked at him for a moment. Then she left. She was half a block away when she heard her name again, and this time it was not Luca's voice. It was Ethan's. He was standing outside a coffee shop she hadn't noticed when she walked past it 20 minutes ago, and he had clearly seen her come out of Delsano's, had clearly seen who she was with, and the expression on his face was something she hadn't seen there before. Not the cold management, not the charm, not the performed hurt. Something genuine, something stripped down, something that was equal parts recognition and fury. "That's who you left me for," he said. "I didn't leave you for anyone," she said. "You were just having coffee with Luca Moretti. That's a separate matter." "A separate—" He laughed, short and hard. "Do you have any idea who he is? Do you understand what you're walking into?" "Ethan, he is going to eat you alive," he said, and his voice cracked slightly on the last word, not with anger, but with something that was, she understood, genuine fear, which surprised her enough that she stopped walking. "I know you think I was the problem. I know everything I did. I know the list. I know what the speech was about. But what you're doing right now," he gestured behind her toward Delsano's, "he is not a better option. He is a man who will use everything you are and give you nothing that's actually safe in return." She looked at him. For the first time in weeks, she looked at him without the accumulated weight of the 6 years pressing the look into something complicated. She looked at him as a person, standing on a sidewalk, genuinely frightened on her behalf, saying the true thing badly, in the way people say true things when they're frightened and haven't practiced saying them without an agenda underneath. "I know," she said quietly. He blinked. "I know who he is," she said. "I found out some of it last night and the rest of it an hour ago. I have an attorney. I have documentation. I am not walking into anything blind." She paused. "That's different from how I walked into things before. You should know that." He stared at her. "You have an attorney," he said. "Yes. Since when do you—" He stopped. Something in his face shifted. She watched him arrive slowly, at the recognition that the person standing in front of him was not the person he had spent 6 years managing, was not the version of Ariana Vaughn who needed someone to tell her strategy was fine and to just go with it, and that this new version had been building itself while he was watching and he had not seen it coming. "I'm going to be okay," she said. "Whatever happens with any of this, I'm going to be okay." He opened his mouth. He closed it. She left him there and kept walking and did not look back. Shields called at 4:58. "The officer listing has been removed," he said. "I have the amended filing confirmation." Thank you, she said. We're not done, he said. There's still the question of why it was filed in the first place and what the intended function was. I'd like to continue the documentation process. Yes, she said. Schedule something for next week. She ended the call. She was standing outside her building. The new building, the 19th floor, the corner windows. She stood on the sidewalk and looked up at it and breathed the city air, damp and diesel and October cold. And she felt the accumulated weight of the day in her shoulders and her lower back and the base of her skull, where tension collected when she was running on no sleep and maximum output. Then her phone buzzed again. Not Luca, not Shields, not Ethan. A number she recognized from the Gala. The woman from the Social Enterprise Accelerator, the one she had talked with for 40 minutes about impact measurement frameworks. The one who had asked her 3 follow-up questions and then asked for her number. The message read, I heard there might be some professional restructuring in your situation. If that's true and you're looking for a landing spot that's entirely clean and entirely yours, I'd like to have a serious conversation. My name is Caroline Reyes. I think you already know mine. Call me when you're ready. She read it twice. She looked up at the building. She thought about clean, the word itself, what it meant, what it cost, how rarely it existed in the spaces where real power operated, how much she had wanted it, and how much she had been willing to compromise it without knowing that's what she was doing. She thought about Luca Moretti sitting across a small table saying, I should have, undefended, without a better argument. She thought about Ethan on the sidewalk with his voice cracking on the word alive. She thought about her name on a document she had never signed and the 17 pages in her portfolio and the specific quality of a woman who had been measured and found useful and used and who had, this time, caught it before it finished. She typed back to Caroline Reyes. Tomorrow morning, you name the place. She went inside. She rode the elevator to the 19th floor and unlocked her apartment and walked to the corner windows and stood in front of them with the city laid out below her in all its indifferent, electric complexity. She was not done, not with Luca, because what he had told her at Delsano's was incomplete. She knew it was incomplete. There was a piece of the structure she hadn't traced yet, a piece that connected the Vantara filing to something she had seen at the edge of the registry search that she had moved past too quickly, a name in the agent address cluster that she had not looked up, a name that nagged at her now, the way a word you can't quite remember nags, a name that... Her phone rang. Shields. She answered. There's something else, he said, and his voice had the quality of a man delivering a secondary wound after the primary one, the careful, deliberate quality of someone who has decided that knowing is better than not knowing, even when knowing is. There's something else, Shields said, and the careful quality of his voice told her before the words did that the secondary wound was not small. The name on the registered agent address, the one shared across the cluster of entities connected to the Vantara filing. I had my associate run it fully. She moved to the window. The city below her, the harbor lights beginning to surface as the afternoon darkened. Tell me, she said. The registered agent is a firm called Pelham Administrative Services. Pelham has been the filing agent on 41 entities over the past 4 years. Of those 41, 11 have been named in either civil inquiries or preliminary federal reviews, none of which resulted in charges, all of which closed quietly. He paused. Pelham's principal is a man named David Corso. Corso's professional history runs through 3 previous administrative firms, the last of which was dissolved in connection with a financial fraud investigation in another state 8 years ago. No conviction. The firm dissolved, Corso moved, Pelham opened. She said nothing. The relevant piece, Shields continued, is that Corso also appears as administrative contact on a separate entity, not connected to Moretti's structure, connected to a man named Ethan Mercer. The window was cold against her palm. She hadn't realized she had pressed her hand to the glass. What entity? She said. The name Shields gave her was one she had never heard. She wrote it on the back of an envelope from a box she still hadn't unpacked, pressing the pen hard enough to score the paper. How long? She said. The entity was formed 14 months ago, Shields said. It has one listed purpose in the filing, acquisition consulting services. The only named client on record is a subsidiary of Moretti's hospitality group. She stood very still. Ethan has been working with Moretti, she said. It was not a question. For at least 14 months, Shields said. Based on the entity formation date, she closed her eyes. 14 months. The same window as Moretti's identification of her. The same window as the construction of the approach, the mapping of her professional profile, the decision to use her name. The gala had not been coincidence. She had known that. What she had not known, what landed now with the particular force of a thing that reorders everything it touches, was that Ethan had been part of the architecture, not a bystander, not a victim of the same situation she was in, a component. She thought about 6 years, about the microphone, about the speech that had gone out across the city in a 47-second clip, about the way the clip had circulated, had reached the right people, had produced the specific professional visibility that made her valuable to Luca Moretti's public-facing structure. She thought about whether a man who wanted her professionally positioned and publicly credible would have found it useful to have her current relationship collapse spectacularly in a room full of the city's most connected people. She thought about Ethan reaching for that microphone. She breathed. "Shields," she said. "I need everything you can get on the entity. The full filing history, the financial disclosures if there are any connection to the Vantara structure or to the federal inquiry closures." She paused. "And I need to know if there's any exposure for me that I haven't seen yet." "I'll have a preliminary picture by morning," he said. She ended the call. She stood at the window for a long time. Then she put on her coat and went back out into the night. She did not go to Luca first. She went to Ethan. Marcus's apartment building, where he had been staying, was 12 blocks north. She walked it. The cold helped. The October air with its harbor edge, the specific physical sensation of moving through it without enough coat, the reminder that the body had its own information and its own needs, and could be relied upon when the mind was running at a frequency that made everything else difficult to trust. He answered the intercom on the second buzz. "It's me," she said. A pause long enough to have content. "Come up," he said. Marcus's apartment was on the 7th floor, a bachelor's space with the functional aesthetic of a man who spent most of his waking hours somewhere else. Ethan met her at the door in a shirt with the collar open and the look of a man who had been sitting with something difficult for several hours. He looked at her face, and whatever he saw there moved through his expression like weather. "You know," he said. "Yes," she said. She stepped inside. She didn't sit. She stood in the center of the room and looked at him and let the silence do its work, because she had learned, slowly, expensively, over years, that silence required people to fill it, and what they chose to fill it with was always more honest than anything produced under direct questioning. Ethan filled it. It didn't start as something that involved you," he said. "Moretti's people approached me 14 months ago about a consulting arrangement. Access consulting, basically. They needed someone with connections inside the regional development space to help them understand the legitimate business landscape." He looked at his hands. "I needed the money. The firm was in a bad year and I had exposure I hadn't told you about, and the offer was clean on its face. Introductions, background, nothing that crossed a line I could see." She watched him. "When did it become about me?" she said. He didn't answer immediately. 6 months in," he said. "They started asking about you specifically, your work, your profile, whether you'd be open to new opportunities." He looked up. "I told them you were happy where you were. I told them that twice." "And the third time?" His jaw shifted. "They suggested that your professional situation might be movable if circumstances changed." The room was very quiet. "The microphone," she said. He looked at her and she could see it in his face. Not denial, not the constructed self-justification she had braced for, but the worst thing, the thing that was harder to manage, which was the face of a man who has arrived at a full understanding of what he did and found no version of the accounting that resolves in his favor. "I was drunk," he said. "I want to be clear that I was drunk, and that what I said was genuinely..." "Ethan, I know," he said. "I know." He pressed his hands flat against the back of the couch. "They suggested it. They said, someone said that a public professional moment, something that got you out of the firm structure and into the open market, would create an opportunity. I said I wouldn't do anything deliberately." He stopped. "And then I drank too much and picked up a microphone, and I want to believe that was entirely my own damage and not..." "Stop," she said. He stopped. I need to ask you something, she said, and I need you to answer it without performing anything for me. No management, no positioning, just the answer. He looked at her. Did you know about the Vantara filing? My name on the subsidiary? No, he said, and the speed and the quality of it, the specific unguarded quality of genuine shock told her that was true. No, what filing? What? Someone put my name as an officer of record on a subsidiary entity connected to Moretti's structure, she said. Filed it without my knowledge or consent 6 weeks ago. The color left his face. I didn't. He pushed off the couch and took 2 steps and stopped. I didn't know about that. I swear to you. Whatever the arrangement was, that was never... He ran a hand through his hair, and the gesture was one she recognized, the real one, the one he made when he was genuinely overwhelmed and not performing it. You're going to do nothing, she said. You're going to talk to a lawyer in the morning, not Shields, your own lawyer, independent, before you say another word to anyone connected to this. Do you understand? He stared at her. You're telling me to lawyer up? Yes. You're protecting... He stopped. I'm not protecting you, she said. I'm telling you the practical next step because you're clearly in a situation you don't fully understand, and doing nothing makes it worse. That's not protection. That's information. He looked at her for a long moment. Something in his face was very still. You're different, he said. And he said it simply. Not as an accusation, not as a compliment, just as an observation. The kind that comes out when a person drops the management entirely and just says the thing they see. Yes, she said. She left. She walked 8 blocks before she called Luca. He answered before the second ring. I know about Corso, she said. I know about the Pelham connection, and I know about Ethan's consulting arrangement. Silence. Tell me now, she said, whether you knew Ethan and I were together when you built the approach. Not generally, specifically. Did you know? A pause, the kind that confirmed before the word arrived. Yes, he said. She nodded to herself, alone on the sidewalk, the city moving past her. She nodded because she had known since Shields' call, and the confirmation was not a new wound but the clean professional closing of one. Come to my office, he said. Not the building you've been to. There's an address. No, she said. I'm not coming to any building you choose. We meet where I choose, or we don't meet. A pause, then, tell me where. She named a hotel bar 3 blocks from where she was standing, public, bright, staffed, with sightlines to every entrance. She was there in 4 minutes. He was there in 11, which meant he had been close, which she filed. He sat across from her at a high table near the windows, and he looked like a man who had decided to come to a conversation without armor, which was either genuine or a superior form of armor, and she had decided that the distinction no longer needed to be her problem. The full version, she said. Ethan, the approach, the Vantara filing. Who filed it and why? He put his hands on the table. Ethan was a source, background access to the regional development network. He did not know the full scope of what we were building, and he was not authorized to know. He met her eyes. When you became the specific target of the division structure, I instructed that no action be taken on your name without your direct consent and signature. The Vantara filing was done by a member of my administrative team who anticipated the engagement and moved ahead of authorization. Which member? A man named Corso working through Pelham. He's been terminated. She looked at him. Today. This afternoon, he said. She thought about the timing. The objection filed this morning, the listing removed by 5, Corso terminated by evening. The machine running cleanup on itself, responsive and fast. Ethan, she said. The microphone. Did you instruct him? No, he said. I suggested to someone in my organization that your professional profile would benefit from independence from your current firm. What that person communicated to Ethan and how, I did not control and did not know the specifics of until afterward. He paused. That is the truth. It is also not a clean truth, and I'm not presenting it as one. She wrapped her hands around her water glass. You built an approach to a woman using her own partner as a lever, she said. Whether you touched that lever directly or delegated it. Yes, he said, and you want me to believe that the courtyard was genuine. The coffee. What you said about my work. I want you to believe it because it's true, he said. I understand that wanting it and deserving it are not the same thing. She looked at him for a long time, at the dark eyes with their quality of attention, the jaw, the composure that was doing more work tonight than she had ever seen it do. She looked at the man who had said, I know, across a coffee table and meant it, and who had also spent 18 months building infrastructure around her without her knowledge, and she held both those things in the same assessment and let them be what they were. I'm not taking the division, she said. He nodded. A single clean motion, no supplementary argument. I'm going to work with Caroline Reyes, she said. Her accelerator, her structure, fully independent, clean in a way that I can verify and maintain. Good, he said, and she heard in the words something that wasn't resignation, something more like respect, which cost him more in this context than agreement would have. The documentation Shields has, she said. The entity filing history, the Pelham connections, the 14 months of Ethan's arrangement. None of that is going to move quietly unless the people connected to it have a reason to let it move quietly. I'll handle it, he said. I need specifics. The Vantara entity will be fully dissolved. The administrative records with your name will be expunged from all internal filing systems. Shields can have independent confirmation of that within 48 hours. The Pelham connections will not surface publicly because it serves no one's interest for them to, including yours. He paused. Ethan's arrangement will be concluded. He'll be paid out and released, and the entity will dissolve. He needs to walk away clean, she said. Whatever he did, he's not equipped for the exposure, and it won't stay targeted to him if it moves. Luca looked at her. Something in his expression shifted. Not quite surprise, but a close relative of it. The micro-adjustment of a man recalibrating what he's looking at. You're protecting him, he said. I'm being practical, she said. Same as before. He was quiet for a moment, then, it'll be handled. She stood. He stayed seated again, the deliberate geometry of giving her the exit. I have one more thing to say to you, she said. He looked up at her. What you found when you studied me, the 43%, the strategy architecture, the gap between reality and perception. That was real. You were right about all of it. She met his eyes. And you built a structure around it that treated it as a resource to be used rather than a capability to be respected. Those two things can both be true about the same person. And I think you know that, and I think that's what you're going to carry out of this. He said nothing. His jaw moved very slightly. I'm not saying it to hurt you, she said. I'm saying it because I think you're capable of knowing the difference, and I think most people in your position stop being capable of that, and the fact that you haven't entirely is worth noting. She picked up her coat from the back of the chair. Goodbye, Luca, she said. He said quietly, Goodbye, Ariana. She walked out into the city. The night had gone fully cold by now, the harbor wind finding every gap in the fabric of her coat, and she walked without calling a car. Let the cold be what it was. Let the physical reality of the night air and the pavement and her own legs moving serve as evidence that she was present and intact and moving under her own direction. She walked for 40 minutes before she went home. 6 months moved the way months move when you are building something. Not quickly, not without setbacks, but with the particular forward momentum of work that belongs to you, that you chose, that reflects what you actually are rather than what you've been told you are by people whose assessments serve their own purposes. The partnership with Caroline Reyes and the Reyes Social Enterprise Accelerator was formalized in November. Ariana came in not as a consultant, but as a co-director of communications strategy, with a contract she had negotiated herself, with terms she had read and understood before she signed, with Shields in the room when she signed them. The work was hard. It was the kind of hard that came from doing things properly, rather than the kind of hard that came from doing them under someone else's definition of proper. She built a small team, 3 people, hired carefully, each one chosen for a specific capability that complemented rather than duplicated her own. She gave credit explicitly and consistently, by name, in writing, in rooms with other people present. She did it because it was right and because she had a specific experiential understanding of what it cost when it wasn't done, and she had no interest in paying that cost forward. The Hargrove account expanded. Dana Cho's consortium became a formal partner on 2 campaigns that ran across 6 months and generated, by the end of the second campaign, a 51% increase in cross-sector donor engagement, 8 points higher than her previous benchmark, the benchmark that had never been acknowledged in any room until Luca Moretti had said the number back to her in a fountain courtyard. She thought about that sometimes. The number. The courtyard. The way a thing can be simultaneously true and used and still remain true regardless of the use made of it. She thought about Ethan occasionally. He had moved to the West Coast in January, a job offer from a firm out there, the clean exit she had ensured was available to him. They had not spoken since Marcus's apartment. She did not expect to speak to him again, not because she bore him the sustained weight of resentment. She had examined the resentment carefully over several months and found that it had metabolized into something more complex and less consuming, but because there was nothing in the overlap of their lives going forward that required speech. He had done what he had done. Some of it was his damage, and some of it was the specific corruptibility of a person who needed to be needed and encountered a structure designed to exploit that need. She had spent enough years next to that corruptibility to understand that its roots were deeper than anything she could have changed, and understanding that had not made the last 6 years less costly, but had made the accounting of them more accurate. Accuracy was what she was working toward now. In everything. She ran into Luca Moretti once. February, a charity event at the Harbor Museum, the kind of event that occupied the same social geography as the Grand Harbor Gala, but operated at a lower temperature, more genuinely civic, less performative. She had not expected him to be there, though she understood upon reflection that she should have expected it. The event benefited the Port Community Foundation, which intersected with interests he maintained. He was near the windows when she saw him, the same city view behind him that she had looked out at 6 months ago from the fountain courtyard. He was in conversation with 2 people she didn't recognize. He looked the same. The charcoal suit, the composed expression, the quality of presence that organized space around it. He saw her at the same moment she saw him. He excused himself from the conversation, quietly, without urgency, and crossed the room. She watched him come and kept her own body still, and her face composed, and waited to find out what she felt when he arrived. He stopped 3 feet from her, appropriate distance, considered. "You look well," he said. "I am well," she said. He held her eyes. His expression had something in it she hadn't seen before, or hadn't recognized before. Something less managed, less structural, the particular expression of a man who has processed something over months and arrived at a position he hadn't expected to occupy. "The Reyes work," he said. "The cross-sector campaign numbers, I followed it." "I assumed you might," she said. 51%, he said. 8 points above your previous benchmark. She allowed herself a small smile. "I know." He looked at her for a moment, and she let herself look back at him. Really look. Without the crisis state that had framed every previous exchange in the back half of their acquaintance. And what she saw was a complicated man who had done something genuinely wrong in a structure that had been built to serve his interests. And who had also, she believed, told her true things. And who was standing 3 feet away from her with the specific expression of a person who understands exactly what they lost and has accepted the understanding. "Is there anything you need from me?" he said. "In terms of resolution, documentation, anything still outstanding?" She considered it. "No," she said. "Shields confirmed everything. It's resolved." He nodded. "Good." A pause. Not uncomfortable. The kind of silence that had its own information that said, "We are people who understand each other in a specific and specific only way. And this is what the end of that looks like. And it looks like this." "Take care of yourself," she said. "You as well," he said. He returned to his conversation. She moved toward the far end of the room where Caroline Reyes was talking to the foundation director, and she felt the moment behind her recede into the general fabric of the evening, felt it take its place in the long sequence of moments that had begun in a ballroom with crystal chandeliers and a microphone, and a woman who had been emptied of enough of herself that someone saying, "I know," in a fountain courtyard could feel like an anchor. She reached Caroline's side. "There she is," Caroline said, and touched her arm lightly, the easy gesture of someone who had become, over 6 months of shared work and shared frustration and shared coffee at 7 in the morning over strategy drafts, a genuine colleague and the beginning of a genuine friend. "Sorry, I got held up," Ariana said. "The foundation director wants to talk about extending the community access series into next year," Caroline said. "I told him you'd have thoughts." "I have thoughts," Ariana said. She set her water glass on a nearby tray and turned to face the conversation with the full weight of her attention, her expertise, her specific and documented and now undeniable capability for exactly this kind of work. And she began to talk, and the room listened. Later, much later, after the event had wound down and the harbor had gone dark and quiet, and she was alone in a car moving through the lit streets, she looked out the window at the city and thought about what it felt like to be located inside her own life. Not the version of her life she had managed around someone else's comfort, not the version she had nearly been absorbed into through flattery, calibrated to her specific hungers. The actual version, the one she had moved toward in increments since the night she stood up in a ballroom and said the true thing out loud, through every difficult morning and expensive accounting and painstaking, unglamorous act of building something that bore her real name. She thought about all of it. The dress that cost 3 weeks of careful saving, the 47-second clip, the plain white card with no name on it, the 17 pages of longhand in a conference room, the new apartment and the reorganized bookshelf and the corner windows with the city in them. She thought about version 14 of the same deck, and about Ethan's voice cracking on the word alive, and about Luca Moretti saying I should have, simple and undefended, on a small table in a quiet restaurant. And she thought about what it cost to tell the truth about yourself to yourself, specifically without an audience, without a microphone, without the adrenaline of a public moment to carry you through it. Just you and the mirror and the accurate accounting of what you are and what you are not, and what you are willing to be from here. She was not finished becoming. She understood that. The 51% was real, and the team she had built was real, and the work ahead was both more complicated and more genuinely hers than anything she had produced in the 6 years before, and none of that meant she had arrived anywhere final. It meant she had arrived at the beginning of something that actually belonged to her. The car pulled up to her building. She got out. The city was cold and indifferent and alive in every direction, and she stood on the sidewalk for a moment before going inside, just stood in it, let it move around her. The late traffic and the lit windows, and the particular human noise of a city that does not pause for any individual reckoning, however private, however hard-won. She had paid for what she knew with things she could not get back. She had built something with what she knew that she had not had before. The math of it was not clean. It was not the math she would have chosen, but it was accurate and accuracy. She had learned this at cost over time in the specific school that life runs for people who are willing to stay enrolled. Accuracy was the only foundation that held. She went inside. She took the elevator to the 19th floor. She unlocked her door. The corner windows held the city in both directions. The harbor dark beyond the lights, the bridges pulled taut between their points. The whole impossible, indifferent, electric thing spread out before her like something she had finally learned to read. She stood at the glass for a long time. Then she went to her desk and opened her laptop and got to work.